What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Tonight we're discussing the resurrection of Jesus.
If the resurrection happened, then that means every other part of the Bible is completely accurate and vital for our lives. And so that's what I wanted to share in this video so that people can see, like, besides people just telling you that Jesus rose from the dead, like, there's evidence here that I wanted people to hear.
If you guys are interested in learning why the girl that we're going to be discussing tonight is wrong about the resurrection of Jesus being a fact, then you'll need to stay tuned to the entire broadcast. Y'all ready for this response video? Now, this lovely girl right here is a Christian, deeply indoctrinated into her faith.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, I know, bless her heart. So she's going to be letting us know why the resurrection is a fact and is not fiction or a myth. Now, obviously, she's been listening to apologists. I mean, she's, like I said, she's deeply indoctrinated. So but let's try to be a little kind to her because, I mean, I feel like she's either maybe early college, maybe right out of high school. I'm not sure. It was made a year ago, so I'm just going to stay on the legal side of things and not insult the possible teenager.
In this video, I wanted to explain or just 5 reasons or evidences that I believe make the resurrection accurate.
Okay, so she's going to present 5 bits of evidence. Evidences, as I've heard, is not an actual word, or is not the way to pluralize it. I don't know. What's wrong with evidences, honey? Not a word?
Not a word.
Not a word.
I've been learning a lot about the resurrection lately with Easter and stuff that happened recently, and so I just wanted to share what I learned. My first one is, well, I titled it Existence, but I just want to kind of explain the things that show that Jesus actually existed on earth, because some people just say, oh, he didn't exist at all, but in that time, outside of religious and Christian writings that were written about Jesus, there were also just like people in the world that were writing about Jesus, because when he was alive, he caused a lot of commotion. Whether people believed in him as the Messiah or not, he was causing a lot of ruckus in the town and in where he was, because he was claiming to be king and he was offending all these religious leaders that were in place at that time, and it was a big deal when Jesus was alive, and so people wrote about it.
Okay, so it would be nice if people wrote about it. But see, the problem is that people didn't write about it. There's actually about 20 authors, or not authors, but historians or historical writers in the first century that should have mentioned all of this ruckus that Jesus supposedly had caused, but they actually didn't. They didn't notice him at all. What did we get? The best that we get is Paul talking about a vision, and then if you fast forward a little bit, you've got like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder, who are really just talking about Christians existing in like the 60s and in the 2nd century. So you don't really have a lot of solid evidence that there was an actual Jesus. But I get that we're talking about the resurrection here, so I'm fine if people want to consider Jesus to be an actual person in history.
Even people that weren't like religious writers or Christian people. And so when we see those writings, we can see that, oh yes, he was here and doing this. So he was like a person. Like whether he was a Messiah or not, he was still a person on earth. And so that's just kind of like our baseline to get things clear.
I would encourage anybody that's using this particular argument that, oh, he caused a lot of ruckus, so people wrote about him, actually have the references that people can actually address. Like if you had given like a list of people like Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Elder, or Pliny the Younger, actually, Pliny the Elder didn't say shit about Jesus when he should have. And you know, any of those other people, Thales, Phlegon, whoever the fuck. It would be nice if you could list those so that I could tell you why you're wrong about it.
And my third one is the empty tomb.
Fucking shit, the empty tomb.
There was a heavy stone covering the entrance, and then there were Roman guards as well. And in that time, Roman guards that failed to guard or failed at their job were to be stripped down completely and burned to death. Something tells me with that they weren't going to take their job very lightly and just let someone come in there and steal the body, as some people say, because they don't want to be burned to death. And I don't think that they would let anyone come near that tomb or just kind of have any sort of way of getting into that tomb. Plus, the stone is very, very heavy.
Another quiz, honey.
Yes.
How heavy was the stone?
It was light enough for Joseph of Arimathea to roll it over the front by himself.
Exactly.
In every story.
Yeah. So it wasn't a very heavy thing. It could be moved by one person. Her attestation of the guards being at the tomb and how they wouldn't have lied or let anybody come in and steal shit. That's actually only in one of the stories. I believe that was Luke, if I'm not mistaken. All of the other stories...
No, that was in Matthew.
Was it in Matthew? Mm-hmm. Okay, Matthew has guards at the tomb. The other ones do not. So Matthew is the only one that records these guards. Matthew is the only one that has Pilate paying off the guards to say that the disciples stole the body and all this other shit. You're very much cherry picking what the actual empty tomb story is, because it really depends on which particular gospel that you read. It depends on how many women came to the tomb. It depends on how many angels were there, how the angels appeared. Did you know at one point the angel actually like thored the fucking stone away and then sat on top of the stone and then pronounced Jesus to be risen?
It was like 1.5 tons, I think. Also, in the empty
1.5 tons?
Did she say the rock was 1.5 tons?
Yes.
Sweetie.
It must have been fucking Hulk that was there instead of Joseph of Arimathea.
Go read your Bible.
Tomb, when people went to go see and be like, oh my gosh, Jesus is gone, his grave clothes were still there, like laying in his placement and where he would have been. But his body wasn't in there anymore.
It's whichever gospel that you read. John only has the rags there and has no angels, while the other ones have a plethora of angels. One of them has 2 fucking angels in it. I can't recall if they find rags at all of them, but I want to say that there's at least 1 or 2 where there aren't like they don't notice rags or they don't mention rags.
When people saw the empty tomb and saw his clothes there, and it was a big commotion, and so the word spread very, very quickly, and all through the town and all through all the people, everyone was talking about it because Jesus, like, they watched him die, and they saw him in the, like, he was in the tomb and then he wasn't.
Oh, in the original Mark, the women went away from the tomb and they didn't tell anybody.
Nope, because they were too scared. And then they came back in the 2nd century and added an extra long ending that basically had the Great Commission at the very end.
I feel like she's just regurgitating things that people have told her, and if she had read it herself, she wouldn't be saying these things.
And so you'd think that the Roman authorities or the religious leaders at that time that wanted Jesus dead would have tried to stop the talk that was going around and try to stop the people from saying all this stuff. But really they didn't, because there wasn't anything that they could say or do, because the tomb was empty. There was no denying that the tomb was empty and Jesus wasn't in there anymore.
Okay, but you have to understand that with only one of the stories claiming there to be guards, the other story is not even mentioning anybody guarding it or anything like that. I mean, it makes way more sense for somebody to steal the body than for Jesus to miraculously resurrect. I mean, even in the Gospels, nobody claims to actually see Jesus raised from the dead. They just talk about their post-resurrection appearances and the angels that appear. Unless you're in John. John, there's no angels.
My 4th one is the witnesses.
Fuck, not the witnesses. Drink! So the witnesses are bullshit. She's going to go through her little explanation here about how there were witnesses and everything like that. But for one thing, the witnesses in the Pauline Creed or that Corinthian Creed, that's just somebody saying that 500 people saw it. There's no corroboration of 500 people seeing it. This is the only place that it appears in 1 Corinthians, as regurgitated by Paul. Now, the thing with Paul is that he got his information from visions and the Old Testament. So he either got this information confirmed by Jesus, or he found in the Old Testament where it confirms that 500 people saw him or whatever. There's also an argument for an interpolation on this particular portion of it, but I'm not really all that sure about it. So I still think that the fact that it's just a baseless claim in this creed is not really all that trustworthy. Like, it's not substantial enough.
They also couldn't stop the talk because Jesus was standing in the town amongst the people, showing the people the wounds in his hands and in his side from the cross. And
honey, did you hear this shit? She just said that Jesus pimp walked his ass into town, showing off the wounds in his hands and in his side.
Well, and he would have had to have been naked.
Yeah, naked. I mean, just fucking what? Like, the closest you could say is that in one of the Gospels, Jesus supposedly comes to the disciples and lets them finger his little hole. That's as good as you could get. Historically, it wouldn't have been holes in his hands. They would have been in his wrists. And I know that a lot of Christians, including myself when I was a Christian, thought that it was in the hands. There's even that whole stigmata thing where you get where people supposedly get holes in their hands and it's supposed to be like some kind of divine sign from God. And it just wouldn't have happened. Like, he got nailed through the wrist. I don't know why. Like, they repeatedly show this, like, even in the movies, of him getting nailed through the wrists and then showing up with holes in his hands. Are you fucking serious? Take a second and think critically about this shit.
Talking to all the people, like, there was no way to deny that that was Jesus. And as he walked among the people, over 500 people, like, physically, like, eyewitnessed, like, saw him.
Actually, Paul, being the one that repeated this particular claim, thinks that the only way that you could be a real apostle or Christian, not Christian in general, just to be a Christian, you just got to be baptized in their religion, right? You got to be part of their religion. But to be an apostle or whatnot, you had to like experience the risen Jesus. And actually, they just say that they saw the risen Jesus in that particular verse in Paul's 1 Corinthians. So your assumption here that they physically saw Jesus walking on the ground. No, they experienced Jesus. They saw Jesus as like a vision. It was a post-resurrection spiritual body of Jesus is what they saw.
There and saw him alive and breathing again. His death was very public. Could you imagine, like, seeing someone that you know die and them be dead for a good 3 days, and then all of a sudden you're just sitting there and you see them walking around in the town?
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty scary, and it sounds a lot like The Walking Dead. But if you will remember, there's one particular gospel that has a whole zombie horde getting awoken and storming the city. So that had to be scary as shit, right?
The facts are, if the resurrection didn't happen, then none of the Christian stuff, like, matters, or the Jesus stuff, or any of this, like, God, like, it doesn't matter because it was all just fun to fake. But the thing is,
I would disagree with this right here because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, like, moral things that you can glean from the New Testament. Like, there are people that are considered secular Christians out there. Well, I don't understand why they consider themselves secular Christians, but they don't believe in a supernatural kind of Jesus. It's more of a spiritual thing, as like a moral life guide or something like that these tales represent. And I'm perfectly fine with people taking them like that. But the problem is that people use this whole Jesus resurrected from the dead, so you must bow down and suck that Jesus dick as a reason to, like, restrict women from getting abortions, or restrict women's rights, or restrict atheists in daily life, or restrict homosexual people from getting a birthday cake or some kind of shit, or wedding cake, whatever the fuck. They use the resurrection of Jesus in order to say those things you cannot do because some Jew on a stick supposedly resurrected 3 days later that makes no sense and has no historical evidence to support it. That's why I have a problem with it.
when you look at the evidence, we can see that the resurrection is historical and it happened, and all of these things play into that. So if it did happen, which it did, this is the saving of the world that we're talking about here. Like, this is no small thing.
I would agree that if Jesus actually did exist and he actually did resurrect, it is a major thing. But you would think that there would be a lot more evidence for this than there actually is. And other than the Bible, there's no real evidence about Jesus in the past. And that Bible has been, edited and constructed over time to to tell the theological story that it wants to tell. So you can't trust what the Bible says. Now, Paul, his writings are in the Bible, but I would say that Paul is the earliest attestation to Jesus, but he's also the only independent attestation to Jesus. And even then, it's just a vision.
Like, this is huge. If the resurrection happened, then that means every other part of the Bible is completely accurate and vital for our lives. And so that's what I wanted to share.
If the resurrection is true, the entire Bible is true. God damn, this is a composite fallacy just run amok. Even if there's one thing about Jesus that's true in the New Testament, that does not mean that the entire Bible is correct. Like, it's just ridiculous to think that. I'm sorry, girl. It's just ridiculous.